tomorrow going to be like? What kind of world are we going to live in when we get our permanent furloughs? Super-speed highways? Plastic Packards? Streamlined cities? What does the future hold in store for us? To get a glimpse of that future, Army-Navy Screen Magazine presents a new department, Tomorrow, previewing our post-war world, the job opportunities, the new fields ahead. For the first in our Tomorrow series, let's look into a brand new development, television. Here's an expert with the lowdown on the inside facts, Dr. Orestes Caldwell, editor of Electronic Industries and former member of the Federal Communications Commission.
I'm glad to have this opportunity to speak to you men and women in the service of America. I believe in this world to come. I think it's going to be a pretty good world. But I've been asked to tell you about television, so I'll trim the philosophizing. Television is most certainly here to stay. It's going to brighten the world of your home. But more important to many of you, it's going to create a lot of new jobs. Now, none of us like crystal gazing, so let's take a look at what is actually happening now.
A 49-year-old unidentified man went berserk last night.
Where does she get her view of the world?
Shotgun. 14 people are dead, including 3
Who will be her
children.
role models? What values will she have? Whose child is she? Yours or the network's? Take back your children. Turn off the TV.
Even though he is retired, Colonel John B. Alexander still works today at Los Alamos National Laboratory in a capacity that is not clearly defined, as does NSA General Michael Aquino. Both personalities have extensive study in the application of non-lethal, extremely low-frequency weapons in attacking the populations and armed forces of enemy nations. Whether these terrible weapons that were supposed to have been turned against our implacable enemies have instead been turned against our very own people is difficult to prove given the nature of the weapons involved. Thousands of American citizens have been publicly claiming for years that they are under attack from a directed energy weapon that attacks their physical bodies and their central nervous systems.
The longer a person watches television, the more easily the brain slips into alpha level, a slow, steady brainwave pattern in which the mind is in its most receptive mode. Images and suggestions are implanted directly into the mind without viewer participation. An effective hypnosis is induced, and the viewer surrenders to the unending television image stream.
Psychological warfare has been waged against America for much of this century. This war for the mind of the public has been facilitated by the emergence of mass media and the transformation of American education by behavioral psychologists. In the book 1984, George Orwell warned that people were in danger of losing their human qualities and freedom of mind without being aware of it while it was happening, because of psychological, emotional, and intellectual manipulation, mind control.
And then, on a quiet, tree-lined street, evil has arrived in a most ordinary way. An old television set. October's next feature may change the way you feel about your television forever. The Video Dead.
Why in the hell don't you leave it alone?
The slaughter's begun already.
Exactly how does the TV set kill somebody?
Don't you find it a little creepy living in the murder house?
Living in the what?
The Video Dead. Once you've seen them, you'll never forget them.
The greatest social messages are promoted through movies and drama, high drama, through the fixation of emotive sequences, emotional sequences, not logical, factual sequences, but pushing points across in an emotional way which register and fix in the mind. So emotional content is very, very important, rather than going through an actual discussion or an argument using logic and facts. There's no debate. And when you're being downloaded through fiction, your guard is down, the censor part of your brain is not in action. It isn't saying, yes, I agree with this, I disagree with that, as you would in a debate or a lecture. You're actually in an alpha state, being completely downloaded with new ideas.
Throughout history, social engineers have refined techniques designed to control large populations.
It must be remembered that the human radiation experiments began in 1943 and became public knowledge only when the government allowed it to be released to the public in 1995. And this was ostensibly to exonerate the guilty parties and to placate the victims. It is with this in mind that you should look at the extensive circumstantial evidence. The U.S. government has a long history of experimenting on human beings, not just the radiation studies, but many different programs of experimentation on unknowing and unwilling human beings. In every instance, these conspiracies were carried out more or less in public for decades without serious challenge. MKUltra mind control experiments began at the end of World War II and became public in the 1970s, however imperfectly, and went black again because of Senate hearings, but these experiments have continued to this day. The only reason that MKUltra was ever brought into the light of day was that a dissident group stole government documents and released them to the press, which initially refused to publish them. The MKUltra archive was destroyed because of the seriousness of the crimes perpetrated by the intelligence community. If it had become public knowledge that the intelligence agencies had allowed Nazi war criminals to experiment on American citizens, including children, and then replicated these techniques themselves, the damage to their reputation could never be undone. The only aspects of CIA criminal activity in general, or MKUltra in particular, that the intelligence community ever admitted to were the ones that were already public, or details that had very little to do with the current capacities of mind control weapons and techniques. Microwave weapons and remote influence of the human central nervous system are the crown jewels of the intelligence community. It should be noted that documents dating from World War I, such as the formula for invisible ink, are still classified, and that no serious secrets have ever been or ever will be willingly divulged. What did become public was only the tip of the iceberg, because mind control techniques and related technology work well.
Television is a massive mass hypnotist to the global mind. And what happens is it is implanting a belief in reality by the minute, and then once we take on that belief implanted, when information enters the eyes, we edit it on the basis of that belief. And so what the global population is subjected to, suffering from, is actually literally mass hypnosis. And when we talk about people who kind of start to see things and see the manipulation they couldn't see before, what do we say about them? What do they say about themselves? They say, I woke up. Exactly what they've done. When people start to go, hey, I can see it now, it's like someone has gone along, like the hypnotist, and clicked their fingers, and it's like, oh, I can see it now. Mass hypnosis. And that is the greatest hypnotist on the planet, and that's the basis of why it was created.
January 27, 1926, Scottish inventor John Baird presented the first successful public demonstration of television, and the world would never be the same. Baird's television featured a spirally perforated rotating disc, which functioned as a mechanical scanner. Used with a photoelectric cell which converted light into electrical impulses, this device could break down an image into a sequence of tiny pictorial elements. The images were sent via a transmitter to a receiver, which reassembled the impulses into the picture, ready for viewing. During this time, inventors were also developing an electronic scanning system, which was the second type of method for sending television pictures. Both methods transmitted pictures only. Sound was sent by radio. Electronic scanning using the cathode ray picture tube proved to be the best method. In 1928, General Electric presented the first dramatic production on television, The Queen's Messenger. The sound portion of the show was simulcast over a radio station. 2 years later, GE broadcast a cartoon image of Felix the Cat instantaneously from New York to Sydney, Australia, and back.
75% of the commercial network television time is paid for by the 100 largest corporations in North America. Some corporations have television budgets that range into the billions per year. Television producers compromise and end up mitigating their desires for those of the advertisers. Thus, television is effectively a private medium for their use only.
They've been programmed. And I'm sad because I know that it's hard for people like that to take an interest, a serious interest in world affairs, to take a serious interest in what their elected officials are doing. And they're not going to be really inclined to study or discover the deception that's being used against them. And so I'm sad because I see all of that in a flash in my mind as being an indication of how easy it is for the masses to be manipulated.
The scientific dictatorship understands what makes human beings tick. They understand our psychology. They've studied it, and they're using it against us. But the minute the public awakens to the fact that there is an agenda to manipulate them, and the second the public realizes that they are being conditioned and controlled, the establishment begins to lose that edge they've got over people. So all I ask viewers to do is to think for themselves and to study public relations, to study advertising, to study propaganda, and to realize how much of it is out there in their daily lives. And then make the decision for yourself. I just want people to think on their own and to not have their decisions and their thoughts and their ideas pre-packaged and basically downloaded into them.
The technology that has evolved is very powerful. In fact, it is the ultimate weapon, and the penalty for revealing these secrets is false imprisonment and assassination. For any new weapon system, it has always been necessary to test it on human subjects to refine and perfect the weapon, whether chemical, biological, or nuclear, or in this case microwave and radio frequency radiation weapons. Human beings have been used to perfect nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons by both the United States and its enemies. These experiments have historically been carried out both in times of war and in times of peace. The only proof of human beings ever being used as experimental subjects in the development of microwave non-lethal weapons was from captured Japanese documents at the end of World War II. Their civilian scientists had used prisoners of war in the laboratory. The POWs were cooked to death through microwave heating in terminal experiments. To obscure the truth, the scientists referred to the test subjects as monkeys in their lab notebooks. The truth emerged only because Japan was a defeated power, and their biological, chemical, and microwave weapons programs were confiscated by the U.S. Navy. To illustrate how it is especially necessary to use human test subjects, we will examine one facet of the arsenal of these non-lethal weapons. Cyclotronic resonance refers to the ability to resonate or spin small particles with a given resonance frequency. Military doctrine for non-lethal weapons in this area is as follows. Initially, enemy armies or populations can be exposed to, sprayed with, a very small amount of chemical or biological agent. The quantity of chemical or biological agent used may be so small as to be virtually undetectable. Following exposure, the enemy population may be targeted with microwave or radio frequency radiation in the exact resonance frequency of the chemical or biological agent used. The toxic agent will begin to resonate or spin and will react with much greater speed or activity within the bodies of the target population, similar to the behavior of enzymes that make life possible. This greater reactivity may be millions of times greater than normal and would behave as if the person had been given a massive dose of chemical or biological agent, enough in fact to cause death. Cyclotronic resonance of chemical and biological agents allows entire armies or populations to be destroyed with only minute amounts of the agent in their bodies if they are attacked with non-lethal microwave weapons afterwards. It will be impossible to develop and deploy such a weapon without first testing it on human beings. These tests are actually being done on American citizens in their own homes. This is just one aspect of the non-lethal weapons testing that is being done on several thousand people across the United States.
What you're looking at is actually a cell phone tower. Many communities have decided that this is easier on the eyes than one of these. President of Larson Camouflage, a company that builds cell phone towers in a wide variety of disguises, from palm trees to water towers to flagpoles. Cell antennas are also being hidden inside all kinds of architecture, like clock towers and fake chimneys. And every antenna comes with electrical equipment which also must be hidden. In this Colorado site, it's encased in a man-made boulder. And in Arlington, Virginia, this house has the neighborhood fooled.
Door-to-door salesmen visit this house. Free newspapers are dropped off at this house.
John Johnson works for Verizon Wireless, which built a house where no one is ever home. The inside is filled with the equipment needed to operate a traditional tower that sits in the backyard. Why do you have really a very nice-looking house as a housing for electronics?
Well, if you look around, this is a very nice neighborhood. We wanted to be able to blend into the neighborhood.
But disguises are expensive. A tree like this can cost as much as $120,000, 4 times the price of a metal tower.
It is a source of revenue that can be extremely beneficial.
The church makes $72,000 a year by leasing its steeple to Verizon, Sprint, and T-Mobile. The money used in church ministries.
Christ taught us to be wise about the talents that we have and to use them for the benefit of the kingdom.
And it's happening at churches both across New England and nationwide. There's so much demand for steeple space, it's even spawned a new company that markets church steeples and negotiates contracts with carriers.
People ask what I do for a living. I say, I spend my day just funneling millions of dollars into the kingdom of God. And everybody chuckles, but I say, no. That's what we do.
Churches profiting not by spreading the word, but by transmitting words.
The human mind is subject to being affected by radio frequency energy, and that's what this device is.
In other words, you can move the moods of large populations using this kind of technology.
So now we have not just maniacs in the Pentagon, but a bunch of Dr. Strangeloves? Pretty weird stuff. But scientists have been experimenting with radio frequencies on animals' brains for decades. And the military has followed it all very closely, especially once it found out the Russians were onto it.
It was all kept a deep, dark secret by the two superpowers.
Back in the 60s, the Soviets began zapping the American embassy in Moscow with a low-frequency beam. No one knows for sure what they were up to, but one theory is that they were trying to mess with people's central nervous systems. And one report did say the diplomats got depressed a lot. And hey, just think of all the nifty applications against the enemy. Why blow people up when you can drive them crazy?
From documents dating back into the early 80s, we see that the military had discussed the possibilities of mind control through radio frequency energy. The possibility is there. The military has studied it.
A 1982 Air Force report called Radio Frequency Energy a major new research initiative and said that RF can, quote, disrupt normal purposeful behavior. A 1987 military report called for more research on RF energy as a non-lethal weapon, pointing out that most of the existing technology is classified. And sure enough, in 1993, There was a big conference at Johns Hopkins University. Here, the entire conference was classified. But the agenda wasn't, and weapons using extremely low radio frequencies, or ELFs, were listed as a very attractive option.
Is it just a coincidence that there's been all of this talk and that HAARP will be experimenting with this? Is that all just coincidence?
I believe the ability of ELF to affect the mind is a side issue for us. It may be real. I can't say.
It's been exceedingly difficult to find information on what is supposed to be a major new initiative of the military. All we see is HAARP.
Well, then I'm being kept in the dark, if that's the case.
This document from Maxwell Air Force Base lays out the use of electromagnetic weapons technologies for debilitating human beings. Using electromagnetic warfare against human beings, you can cause disease, you can cause hysteria, or you can cause passivity for population control.
Extremely low frequencies affect us because they are the same frequencies that our brains output. And when they're in the environment around us, our brains try to entrain to them. So our brains try to mimic those signals. And if those signals are not good ones for our behavior, then we can fall apart. We can behave differently. We could get sick. We could feel very stressed and not know.
If we ever learn how to electronically stroke the ionosphere, this layer that begins about 30 miles above the Earth's surface that's electrically charged, if we could ever figure out how to electronically stroke it, he said, to get it to send a signal back to the Earth, we could affect the behavior of people over huge geographic areas on a hemispheric basis. And it wouldn't affect everyone. It would affect 70 or 80% of the population is what they more or less figured. But this was a technology that didn't exist in 1969. In the early 70s, Zbigniew Brzezinski referenced J.F. Gordon's work and said, you know, this is a technology that will likely emerge.
Zbigniew Brzezinski predicted back in 1970. He said they will be a highly internationalist elite with a globalist outlook. He indicated that their technotronic society would exploit the latest communication techniques to manipulate emotions and control reason. He observed human beings becoming increasingly manipulable and malleable.
You can induce virtually any effect that a chemical can cause in a living system with an external, primarily extremely low frequency magnetic field.
The ultimate weapon in the info war would be so secret, so invisible, so undetectable, you would never know your mind was under attack. Dr. Michael Persinger is a professor of psychology and neuroscience. Dr. Persinger's research focuses on brain trauma, and he uses carefully controlled doses of electromagnetic radiation to induce relaxation and alleviate pain.
So what Sandra did was to initiate a opiate-releasing pattern. That's a burst-firing field that is stimulated once every 4 seconds. And that produces relaxation and a very pleasant sensation. Similarly, using the appropriate fields, we can induce fear and apprehension, but clearly that would be unethical in that setting.
Dr. Persinger's tests suggest that carefully programmed electromagnetic frequencies can tap into individual brains and influence people's emotions.
The cognitive processes of the human brain are really quite simple. And if you understand how they work, you can make entire populations think and decide the manner in which you wish.
Many experts are skeptical of such an Orwellian scenario, but Persinger thinks the implications are chillingly real.
Suppose you generate a field that produces fear, fundamental fear, in large numbers of people. And then, over the television, or in traditional ways, you say, the reason we're having this fear is because of this particular group. And now you start to move the population believing in the direction that you wish.
To influence 250 million people, the equivalent of the entire population of the United States, may not be that difficult. According to Dr. Persinger, we already have the technology, satellites and television, and radio transmitters. Mind control may already be happening.
And when you start to research the subliminals in advertising and television. What staggers you is not what they do and what's there, but the scale of it. I mean, it's like our consciousness is being hit by an explosion of this stuff. Because you see, this is a very interesting point. Experiments have shown that about 1.5 seconds before the conscious mind decides to take action, move its arms or whatever, speak, 1.5 seconds before it consciously decides to do that, the electrical signals have begun in the brain to do it. For me, the conscious level is the experiencer and observer of reality, but the subconscious is the creator of it, the generator of it. And this is why the Illuminati want the subconscious mind through subliminals. What does subliminal mean? It means below threshold. It's below the threshold the conscious mind picks up, but the subconscious mind picks everything up like a sponge. And therefore they are planting these thoughts into the subconscious, which then filter down into the conscious, and we think we're having our own thoughts, when actually they're implanted thoughts done at a subliminal level.
When I was growing up, people were talking on their front porches, neighbors were playing baseball, there were nightly barbecues. You don't see that anymore. We've lost our communities. You drive through neighborhoods, you see the blue glow of television sets. We're losing our humanity. So if you want to rebel against the globalists, the social engineers, start by turning the TV off a few hours a day and actually getting to know your neighbors. Getting outside that comfort zone. Expanding your horizons. By coming together as communities, by getting to know our neighbors, we defeat the social engineers.
The basic problem is that we are living in a virtual reality. We're living in a totally controlled environment, an environment that has been created by mass media. Now, many people, especially young people, accept unquestioningly the reality that is presented by the media. Popular culture, movies, television, music, carry messages about how society works and how people should behave. And so entertainment is not value-free. It has ideological content. It presents a worldview that influences the people who watch the programming. There is a reason why television networks and the music industry, the various companies, they have programming departments. The programming that we are constantly assaulted by throughout our life conditions us. It programs us to a particular worldview. Now, we may consider it normal, because we were born into the system of lies and deception. In fact, deception has become part of the social framework of society. And because we were born into the situation and our parents were born into it and have suffered from it, we don't know any better. And so we don't necessarily see things as they are. We see things as we are. Now, there are two primary means by which people are manipulated and controlled. One is very simple, very basic, and that is simply the control of information and the control of, if we don't have all of the facts on any particular topic, then our judgment is going to be no better than the quality of our information. And in spite of the fact that we have an information overload through all the information that's available on the internet and other sources, we have to have the presence of mind to be able to evaluate the information that we have available. And it's a matter of having to dig through and determine what's true, what are the lies, what are the half-truths, under that one basic heading, information control, where there has been a long-held consolidation of ownership of the different medias, press, publishing, film, music, television, consolidated ownership into the hands of very few individuals, the multinational corporations. Today, there are half a dozen multinational corporations that are controlling the information and entertainment choices that people have. Working as an editor, it was easy to see how simple it is to change the meaning of an event or change the meaning of what someone says through editing. And so I was very well aware of how plastic and moldable media reality was. But I didn't fully appreciate the extent to which we are all manipulated and controlled by media, including those people who work in it. Using television as the prime example of how mental programming and mind control works, television is the most powerful weapon of psychological warfare in history. And yet, television, for many people, is a member of the family in the household.
It's the primary member.
Yes.
It runs the household.
Yes, well, not only that, but it's the primary source of information, and the television, in effect, represents an altar, a religious altar that the nation is worshiping before. Many people don't think about the things that affect them subconsciously, because generally they don't know what to look for until someone comes around and starts pointing these things out to them, and then they can see how we are all influenced by unseen forces without our conscious awareness. In fact, the ultimate control is to control people without their conscious awareness. Again, television is a prime example. Think back to whenever you have observed young children or older adults sitting watching television. They have this glassy-eyed, vacant look in their eyes because they are in a trance state, in a hypnotic state of mind. This is very important, very significant, that the medium of television has the capacity to do this, and it doesn't matter what you're watching. The flickering effect of the television image, although it appears to be static and stationary, it is actually flickering. We don't see it consciously, but subconsciously, the repeating visual pattern of the flicker induces the trance state. And that's the basic principle behind hypnotic programming, is that you get the subject to focus the attention of the conscious mind on one of the five senses. So in the case of watching television, we're talking about the sense of sight and the flickering image. In the case of sound, any repeating sound pattern will induce the trance state. Now, why this is important is that we are more suggestible to mental programming during this state of mind than at any other time. We're very vulnerable to manipulation at this time, because the first order of business for a propagandist or an advertiser is to create the circumstances that will induce a state of mind that is favorable to the reception of their message. And that state of mind is the hypnotic state of mind, making television extremely important in this whole process of creating a unified mindset among the entire population. Have you ever bought something and then later on wondered, why did you buy it? I think we've all had that kind of experience.
Quite a few times.
Well, that's a common everyday illustration of being triggered to make a purchase based on a conditioned response that has been built into us to have a preference for a particular product. In fact, that is the whole point of programming, whether it be by an advertiser or a propagandist. There's really no difference between the two. One's selling products, the other is selling ideas. The whole point is to build into us a conditioned response where we will respond automatically without thinking, with a preference for a particular idea or preference for a particular product. And that is the whole point of programming. If you think about it, whenever you hear news broadcasters speak, you realize that regardless of their ethnic background, whether they be black, white, Hispanic, or Oriental, they all have a similar manner of speaking. They have a speech pattern that is associated with the dissemination of true factual information on the news broadcast. Their speech pattern is similar to the patterned speech of a hypnotist. The news broadcaster looks directly into the camera and into the eyes of the viewer. Another hypnotic technique. The newscaster is an authority figure, encouraging the acceptance of the information. People, one, will accept information that comes from an accepted and respected authority. And then the repetition repetition of the information over and over and over again is what builds that conditioned response, so that whenever they are presented with the information again, then they'll accept it automatically without thinking about it.
Do you think that the media is complicit in sort of the mind control aspect? Do you think that they are, because I'm a firm believer that the media is completely controlled.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and that's my feeling as well, in my experience, that the media has become the fourth branch of government.
We're programmed today perfectly, just like machines. We tie this in with the Brzezinski. Brzezinski said in 2 Ages. Now this guy was way up with the NSA. He's a master geopolitician. He admits he works in 20, 50-year periods to do with geopolitics in other countries. But he said himself, the public will shortly be unable to think or reason for themselves. He was meaning by the form of information that was given to them, the type, the formulas that were in use then in the 1970s. He says, eventually they'll be unable to think or reason for themselves. And eventually, he said, they will expect the media to do all their thinking and reasoning for them. Well, that's happened today. That's why people today can't think outside of the programming from television.
Zbigniew Brzezinski, Obama's main foreign policy advisor, talks about how a cult of personality can be artificially manufactured to influence the masses.
In the first months of my administration, to pull our economy... Oh, goodness. Sorry about that, guys. To pull our economy back from the brink, including the largest and most sweeping economic recovery plan in our nation's history.
We're gullible, but we're also willingly gullible. We want a human being, a big daddy, to come along and make everything right for us. And as long as we believe that, we'll always basically get shafted.
In addition to John, sorry, I just noticed that I jumped the gun here. Go ahead and move it up. I'd already introduced all you guys.
It's the presidential reality show. But when it became an Oprah production, it became slick. You don't have a president, you have an actor. They say that politics is show business for ugly people. You got it.
What am I going to tell the president when I tell him his teleprompter is broken? What will he do then?
Perhaps the largest deception played on the television viewing public is the inclusion of video news releases during the network television news. Unbeknownst to most, the video news release, or VNR, have been a major part of television since the 1980s. Having been produced by major corporations to appear to be the average news story that, when incorporated into the daily news, attempts to sway public opinion in promoting a product, service, or event. Some VNR productions have been known to hire actors to portray a news correspondent, a journalist, a seemingly random man in the street, and other characters whose sole responsibility it is to deliver the carefully scripted comments, all of which leads to a recreated actuality of a credible news story. Corporations known for producing VNRs include Philip Morris, Microsoft, the pharmaceutical industry, the Department of Defense, the Census Bureau, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Education, FEMA, and the granddaddy of them all, MediaLink Worldwide. Many news stations have felt financial pressure to become increasingly profitable. This has led to significant cost cutting in the newsrooms themselves, which often includes technicians and producers. Thus, demand has grown for cheap news supplied by the outside sources. And thus the public are left with stories of little significance, while more important issues get swept under the carpets of corporate America. The fight against VNRs has been growing, with the Federal Communications Commission setting fines against media outlets who fail to inform their viewers that a particular story has been produced by some agency outside of the news department. Even though the fight continues, the practice of including VNRs into the daily news is as prevalent today as it was 20 years ago. When a VNR is broadcast over the airwaves and is not disclosed to the public, media outlets everywhere run the risk of ruining their credibility.
So you may be wondering what NLP actually is. Well, NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming, and it's kind of like a user manual for the mind. And it allows you to communicate more effectively, make change easily, so change your behavior, your habits, your emotions and your beliefs, and clears negativity from the past. So let's have a look at it a bit closer. The neuro part of it refers to, as I said, the mind and the brain. So here you can see, well, the mind, the conscious, this representing the conscious mind, this representing the unconscious mind. Conscious mind is about 10% of the mind's capacity. Unconscious mind, therefore, about 90%. Now, what does that mean? It simply means that conscious mind is everything that's currently in conscious awareness. It's like a torch that shines into a black box, and wherever that light shines, that's what's currently in conscious awareness. Everything else is in darkness and is therefore unconscious. So our unconscious holds all our memories, everything we've ever experienced in our life. Everything we do automatically, all our habits and our beliefs and values, everything we live by, that just runs automatically, unconsciously, without us being aware of it. So all of these things sit in the unconscious mind, and we call them programming. And the linguistic part is about language. It's about using language to either trigger these programs, to influence people, or to change these programs. It's like changing the code that makes up your mind so that you can change your mind.
Numerous motion pictures have precipitated violence over the years. The Warriors, one of a number of movies about street gangs, was followed by a rash of violence in cities across the nation. Approximately 28 people died playing Russian roulette in response to seeing The Deer Hunter. The press reported that John Hinckley Jr. told his attorneys that the idea to assassinate President Reagan came to him after seeing the movie Taxi Driver. A report released in 1982 by the National Institute of Mental Health said,
"Violence on television does lead to aggressive behavior by children and teenagers who watch the programs."
Dr. Thomas Nerut from the U.S. Naval Hospital at NATO headquarters in Naples investigated the use of film to train servicemen who were not inclined to kill to be able to do so. Films were screened which showed people being maimed or killed violently to desensitize the men to those acts. A progressively more graphic depiction of violence in movies, television, and music desensitizes people, especially young people, to real-life violence and increases tension, anxiety, and fear among older people who perceive increasing lawlessness and the breakdown of society. A University of Massachusetts study of crime programs on television reveals that law enforcement officers are often shown breaking and entering illegally, failing to inform suspects of their rights, terrorizing and coercing witnesses, and accepting bribes. Constitutional guarantees are regarded as bothersome technicalities that hinder the police in the performance of their duty. Professors Katch and Ahrens, who conducted the study, said,
Police shows seem to reduce the ordinary citizen's awareness of constitutional rights and responsibilities. Many people engrossed in the drama of rapid-fire action or preoccupied with violence fail even to notice blatant police state tactics.
The Supreme Court has consistently expanded police powers and governmental authority while curtailing individual rights, thus enacting into law principles much like those presented on TV crime programming. The relationship between the increase in crime and the decrease in individual rights is a classic example of the Hegelian principle of bringing about change in a three-step process. The first step is to create a problem. The problem in this case is the increase in crime brought about in part by mass media programming of criminal behavior, making violence an acceptable means of problem solving, especially among young people. The second step is to create opposition to the problem. In other words, create anxiety and fear in the public so that people demand that something be done about it. The third step is to offer the solution to the problem that may entail a restriction of individual rights or some other predetermined goal, thus bringing about change that would have been impossible to impose on people without proper psychological conditioning. By causing emotional stress and mental confusion, judgment is impaired and suggestibility increased. Under these conditions, people allow their rights to be diminished without realizing its ramifications.
In a typical context in business, there is an explicit, overt attempt by all parties to manipulate the internal maps and behaviors of the rest. If that same ethic were allowed in the case of training and application with clients who are undergoing significant personal changes, even Freud recognized over 100 years ago that to allow the imposition of the perceptions, the values, the beliefs of the analyst onto the client was a fundamentally unethical transaction.
The plan is as old as history, with its modern manifestation having reared its ugly head in 1776 when Adam Weishaupt, professor of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, founded the Order of the Illuminati, the Enlightened Ones. The goal of the Illuminati was the creation of a new world order. This was to be accomplished by infiltrating all areas of society and destroying civilization from within. The public has been deluded about the material aims of a few and the very existence of the hidden rulers who sit at the very pinnacle of power and see themselves as lords of this planet. The purpose of government is inexorably tied to the purpose of life. The sum of good government is knowledge of the purpose of life and the administration of society towards that goal. If the men in leadership positions in the world do not know the objective of life, then they are not capable of administering a peaceful society. If, however, they do know, then what we see happening in the world is the deliberate attempt to undermine the primary objective of life. The missing dimension in world politics is the spiritual dimension. The problems of life cannot be solved by material means. Modern civilization is missing the point of life. Human life is meant for understanding spiritual values. Real knowledge is knowing yourself, what you are, what God is, and understanding your relationship and duty to God. It is our duty to understand God, abide by His laws, and learn to love Him. Then, all of our problems will be solved. When men are not governed by God, they will be ruled by tyrants. The material world is just like a prison. Spirit soul is imprisoned in a material body which is imprisoned in the material world. We do not belong in this material world. We are spirit souls and belong to the spiritual world.